The night Uche arrived in Toronto, the city felt cold and distant. Snow drifted across the streetlights like tiny ghosts, and the wind carried the sound of passing trains, the kind that reminded her of home and of the restless years she had left behind. After the formalities at the immigration counter, she walked toward the arrivals hall. She stood there for a long moment, unsure of where to go, until a settlement support volunteer noticed the quiet panic in her eyes. He guided her to a small corner reserved for passenger assistance, where community service workers soon arrived. After a brief assessment, gentle questions about safety, support, and where she intended to sleep transportation was arranged to a shelter that had space for the night. That was how she found herself standing before a narrow brick building tucked between glass towers and silence. The sign above the door read Harbor Street Shelter, a place she had never heard of, yet one she would eventually call her first refuge. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, detergent, and weary hope. She hesitated by the doorway, watching strangers wrapped in blankets, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and survival. Someone looked up and offered a small nod, the kind of welcome only those who've lost everything know how to give. The two staff on shift were already overwhelmed, juggling intake forms, shivering arrivals, and a laundry room that never seemed to rest. When Uchi stepped in, she set her bag aside and walked toward the intake table. "I can help," she said softly. "Just tell me what to do." She wasn't staff, not yet, just a newcomer with one suitcase and grief stitched into her bones. But helping was the only language she knew. The staff hesitated, but she insisted to help. After a while, and out of character, they simply nodded. On her very first night in Canada, folded blankets for strangers who were as lost as she was. Each blanket carried the scent of those who had come, people drifting between hope and despair, trying to survive one more night. It wasn't a job. It wasn't an assignment. It was instinct, the part of her that refused to let suffering go unanswered. People noticed how she cared, how her eyes softened when she saw pain. Some even warned her not to care too much. But Uche couldn't help it. She had already given her heart away long ago to humanity itself. Back home in Nigeria, she had been a nurse, the kind who worked double shifts, washed her hands between tears, and prayed that no patient would die on our watch. Volunteering at the shelter gave her a reason to rise each morning. After a few weeks, she found a tiny basement room, small, quiet, and enough. But every day, she returned to Harbor Street Shelter because people needed warmth, and she understood brokenness. In those small acts of service, grief and hope brushed against each other, teaching her how to breathe again. When she landed in Canada, she promised herself that if she could not heal in a hospital, she would heal in the streets wherever brokenness lived. For weeks, she volunteered in quiet rhythm, dawn to dusk, blankets to beds, tea to trembling hands, until one stormy evening when the door pushed open and the wind brought in a man who looked like winter itself. His coat was torn, his face unshaven and pale, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. He stopped at the doorway, as if afraid to step into the light. Uche approached him gently. Her voice, soft but firm, told him he was welcome, that it was warm inside. He barely nodded, shivering as he crossed the threshold. That night, he slept by the far window, alone, his hands clasped like a man praying in his sleep. And Uche, tired but curious, watched him from across the room. There was something about the way he carried silence, like it was a punishment. She didn't know his story yet, but she felt it, the ache of a man who once had everything and lost himself in the process. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the heater hummed. And for the first time since she arrived in this new country, she felt something stir inside her chest. Something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, not for herself, but for the stranger who had just walked through her door. The snow outside had not melted for days. It clung to the streets the way memories cling to the heart, unwilling to let go. Uche rose before dawn, her breath forming small clouds as she walked toward the shelter. She had begun to recognize the rhythm of the city, the hum of streetcars, the crunch of boots, the sigh of strangers waiting for morning. Toronto was still new to her, a city of lights that never seemed to notice her name. But she didn't mind. After all, she had once been someone, a nurse, a wife, a mother, and a friend. Now she was simply a helper in a shelter, a pair of hands, and a steady heart. Her memories followed her like shadows. The hum of mosquitoes in Lagos, the smell of fried plantain on Sunday mornings, the laughter of her son Kelechi as he ran through the house playing. He was 8, bright, fearless, and always asking questions she couldn't answer. Then came the unrest, the protests, the curfews, the gunfire that began like distant thunder and ended too close to home. She remembered the night they fled, Kelechi's hand in hers, the trembling light of a single candle as they prayed in the corridor, and then the explosion, silence, ashes. Her world collapsed into smoke and echoes. She was pulled from the rubble days later. Kelechi was gone. So was her husband. The only thing left was a cross pendant she still wore beneath her coat, its edges worn from years of touching whenever grief returned. When she arrived in Canada months later, the immigration officer asked, "What brings you here?" She could only whisper, "Survival." She volunteered where kindness was currency, in places where no one asked for resumes, only compassion. The shelter became her sanctuary. Each person she helped felt like a quiet prayer, a small act of defiance against the darkness that once swallowed her own family. It was during one of those mornings, while refilling the coffee urn, that she noticed the stranger again, the man from the night of the storm. He was fixing a broken chair near the window, moving slowly, his breath visible in the cold light. She thanked him. He gave a faint smile, one that vanished before it reached his eyes. Over the next few days, he began to help more, feeding the shelter's old cat, mending loose hinges. He spoke little, but his silence was kind. The others called him the quiet man. Uche began to sense that he carried his own war inside him, a private battle that had nothing to do with bullets or borders. Sometimes she saw him staring out the window at dawn, his hands trembling slightly, as if haunted by something only he could see. One evening, while wiping tables, she heard his voice for the first time in full sentences. He was telling another volunteer about the law, about justice, about how easy it was for good people to make ruinous decisions. His tone was careful, heavy with regret. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, muttering that he had once worked in the system and that it broke him more than he ever imagined. That night, as she laid in her small room, she thought about him, about the way grief recognizes grief. She knew the language of guilt. She had spoken it herself for months, and in that quiet, she prayed. Not the loud, desperate prayers of the past, but the tender ones whispered through tears. She prayed that maybe this stranger had been sent her way for a reason, because sometimes two broken souls don't meet by accident. They meet because the universe still believes in healing. The days inside the shelter passed like pages in a worn book filled with small kindnesses, tired faces, and unspoken stories. The Harbor Street shelter wasn't beautiful by any standard. The walls were chipped, the light flickered, and the air smelled faintly of bleach and instant coffee. But to those who came through its doors, it was the closest thing to mercy they had. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise, brushing snow from her sleeves as she unlocked the side door. She would hum softly hymns her mother used to sing while cooking in Lagos, and the sound would fill the empty halls before the others stirred. The stranger, the quiet man, with the storm behind his eyes, had become part of the routine. He arrived early too, sometimes even before she did. He never said much, but when things broke, he fixed them. When arguments flared, he stepped between them calmly, like a man who had spent a lifetime breaking up fights with reason instead of force. She started leaving him small thank you notes, folded pieces of paper with words like grateful and hope. He never mentioned them, but she often saw the notes carefully tucked into his coat pocket. In the afternoons, when the shelter settled into its tired rhythm, she sometimes caught him sitting by the window, writing in a small black notebook. The handwriting was elegant but urgent, like someone trying to remember what it means to be human. Once, curiosity overcame her. When she passed by his table, she glanced at the open page. The words she saw were haunting, atonement, truth, mercy. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about those words. They reminded her of the prayers she used to whisper after the bombing, the ones she thought God had stopped listening to. As winter deepened, their silences began to change. They no longer felt heavy, they felt shared. Two people carrying invisible weights, walking beside each other without needing to explain why. Sometimes he would bring her tea, strong, black, no sugar, the way Nigerians drink it back home. It surprised her the first time. She wondered how he knew. He just smiled faintly, as if to say, I pay attention. In those moments, she began to realize something dangerous. She was starting to care. But she had made a vow years ago never to care too deeply again. Caring, she believed, was how people broke, and yet here she was drawn to a man who spoke like forgiveness and carried pain like penance. One evening a blizzard swept through the city. The power flickered out, the shelter filled with cold breath and fear. She moved quickly, lighting candles, gathering the people close. The quiet man, now a familiar shadow beside her, helped distribute blankets, calmed the restless, whispered reassurance. In that darkness, their hands brushed. It was accidental, brief, but it lingered like a promise neither of them dared to name. When the lights finally returned, she saw him looking at her not with desire, but with recognition. The kind that said, I see your scars, and they look like mine. From that night on, they didn't need to speak much. A nod became a conversation. A glance became an understanding. And somewhere in the rhythm of those quiet days, the shelter began to feel less like a job and more like home. Winter began to loosen its grip on the city, but inside the shelter, time still moved with the heaviness of snow. The stranger had a name now, Michael. He told Uche one morning while fixing a broken kettle. His voice was low, unsure, as if the name itself no longer belonged to him. They spoke more often quietly, between duties, between cups of tea. Michael listened more than he talked, but when he did speak, his words carried the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime measuring them carefully. He told her about his love of books, how he once believed justice was the highest virtue. He said he used to think the world could be balanced by law alone, that if everyone told the truth, peace would follow. But then his eyes would cloud and he would change the subject, asking about her instead. Uche told him about Lagos, the heat, the music, the smell of rain on red dust. She told him about her mother's garden and how hibiscus flowers always meant hope. But she never spoke about Kelechi or the ache that lived in her chest like an open wound. Something unspoken hung between them. The air shifted whenever he touched that black notebook, the one filled with words like truth and atonement. She had learned enough about pain to recognize its language, and his was fluent. One evening, the shelter was quieter than usual. Most of the guests had gone to sleep, their breathing rising and falling like waves. She stayed back to finish cleaning and found Michael sitting by the window, writing again. The candle beside him flickered, casting his face in golden shadow. She approached softly, her voice a whisper. What are you writing tonight? He didn't look up. Instead, he said something that made the room feel colder. I'm trying to remember who I was before I became what I am. She asked gently, and what are you now? He closed the notebook and said, haunted. The word lingered in the air. He told her little pieces then, fragments of a story too painful to tell whole. A courtroom, a mistake, a boy who never came home. She didn't press for more. Sometimes mercy sounds like silence. That night, Oche lay in her small apartment, replaying his words. She felt a strange pull compassion mixed with fear. What kind of man spoke like that? What kind of past could shape a soul so burdened and yet so kind? The next morning, she arrived early. The snow had melted into slush, and puddles reflected the gray sky. Michael was already there, sitting alone, staring at the coffee pot as if lost in another world. Something inside her broke. She walked over, placed the cup in front of him, and said softly, "Whatever you've done, you're still human." He looked up at her eyes glistening with a sorrow too deep for words. Then he whispered, "Not everyone would agree with you." Over the following weeks, Michael changed. His steps grew slower, his eyes more distant. He would pause mid-task, lost in thought. One evening, she found him kneeling beside a guest, an older man in distress, holding his hand and praying quietly. His voice trembled with sincerity. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Uche found him by the back door, staring into the darkness. She joined him. For a long while, neither spoke. The city hummed faintly beyond the walls. Sirens, laughter, life continuing elsewhere. Then he said, almost himself, "Do you believe people can be forgiven?" She turned to him, her breath visible in the cold. "I believe people can change, and sometimes that's what forgiveness looks like." He nodded, as though she'd given him permission to exit. But deep down, she knew whatever haunted Michael wasn't done with him yet. Sometimes, redemption knocks softly before it storms the door. She sat on the bed that night, her hands still trembling from the cold she couldn't name. The shelter was quiet, except for the hum of the old radiator and the muffled cough of someone down the hall. Her mind had other plans, memories pressed against her eyelids, restless and uninvited. She remembered the house that used to smell like jasmine, the laughter that once lived in its walls, the photo of her little boy. Sometimes she would whisper his name just to hear it again. The sound of it was a fragile bridge between two worlds, one she couldn't return to, and one that hadn't yet made space for her. The shelter workers said healing takes time, but time, she thought, is cruel to the broken. It stretches too long, and the nights last forever. That evening, a volunteer had sat beside her, a woman with tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much and chosen to stay kind anyway. She had offered Oche a cup of tea, saying softly that it helps even if only for a while. Oche wanted to tell her that tea couldn't fill the space her child once filled, but instead she smiled, because sometimes kindness deserves a smile, even when your heart isn't ready to give it. Oche felt unexpected stillness. Not peace, not yet, but the kind of quiet that asks you to breathe. And for the first time in months, she did, deeply, painfully, like breathing was an act of defiance. She didn't know it yet, but that small, trembling breath was the beginning of her return, not to the past, but to herself. Michael had been there for weeks now. He didn't speak much, but his presence filled the spaces that silence usually occupied. Oche noticed the way his hands shook when he poured water, the way he flinched at loud voices, the way he paused before touching anything fragile, a cup, a blanket, a child's worn toy. Every movement carried weight. Every breath hinted at a story too heavy to tell. Weeks passed. They planted flowers behind the shelter, stubborn green, pushing through frozen dirt. He laughed once, a sound so rare it made her heart ache. For the first time, she saw traces of the man he could have been. And yet, in quiet moments, when he thought she wasn't looking, his hands trembled, his notebook opened again. The ghost never left. One evening, she asked him directly, "Why did you disappear?" He stared at the floor. "Because punishment isn't enough for what I did. I've been hiding behind good deeds, hoping it would erase the rest, but it doesn't." She reached out, laying a hand over his. "You can't undo the past, but you can Try to honor it. Helping others, this is your redemption. He shook his head. She thought of her own past, the flight from Lagos, the memories that still clung like smoke, and she understood him better than she ever expected. Later that night, he confided in her. Che didn't flinch. She only said, "Then make it mean something. Stay. Keep helping people. That's how you honor him." He looked at her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "You teach mercy, the one thing I never gave." And for the first time, he let her see his fear. The kind of fear that has nothing to do with law or judgment and everything to do with losing yourself to the weight of yesterday. The next morning, Michael left the shelter early, leaving only his notebook behind. Inside a single line, "She taught me mercy, the one thing I never gave." Uche held it close, feeling the weight of his confession in her hands, heavy, fragile, alive. And somewhere, deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Weeks went by, and then out of nowhere, she received a strange invitation. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, paper, and tension. It was a room that had seen justice delayed, promises broken, and tears spilled in silence. And today, it would witness something else, a reckoning long overdue. Uche sat quietly in the back, hands clasped around her coat, her breath steady but her heart hammering. Michael Rowan, the man who had disappeared into guilt and shadows, stood at the center, older, warier, but unflinching. His eyes found hers across the room, a single unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. The judge called the court to order, the gavel striking like a heartbeat. Michael began, not with excuses, not with apologies half swallowed, but with truth. "I am Michael Rowan," he said, voice carrying through the silent hall. "I am here to answer for my failures, my choices, and the boy whose life I failed to protect." He spoke of the case, the wrongful conviction, the fragile evidence, the boy's mother's tears that had haunted him every night since. He spoke of the silence that followed, the shame, the flight, and finally, he spoke of the woman who reminded him that even the darkest hearts could feel mercy. Uche's chest tightened. She had not imagined this moment the culmination of years of hiding, of surviving, of listening, and yet here it was, redemption dressed in courage. Michael's confession was meticulous, complete. Every name, every detail, every lie he had told to protect himself was laid bare. The courtroom listened, and the room seemed to hold its breath. When the prosecutor asked why he had chosen to come forward now, he looked at Uche just for a heartbeat. "Because one woman believed I still could," he said. The sentence was read, 12 years. But Michael's story did not end there. In his cell, the nights were quiet. He had begun journaling in a new notebook, each line trembling alive with the weight of a heart learning to forgive itself. "Forgiveness found me through a woman who saw light in my ruin," he wrote in those last hours, and then silence, a peace he had not known in decades. Outside, spring arrived fully, brushing the city with color. The garden behind the Harbor Street shelter building bloomed with bright yellow flowers, stubborn, fierce, and alive. Uche stood among them, holding Michael's notebook to her chest. Tears traced her cheeks, but her heart felt steady. She whispered to the wind, to the flowers, to the memory of a man who had carried so much guilt. "You made it home, Michael." And in that moment, she understood the truest kind of redemption, not found in verdicts, not measured in years, not weighed in the judgment of men, but in quiet acts of courage, in listening, in staying when others leave, in offering your heart to someone who has none left to give. Because sometimes love and mercy arrive quietly in a small shelter on a snowy morning, in the patience of a stranger, in the act of seeing someone who thought they were unseen. And that was enough. She said these things not because she expected an answer, but because she remembered how it felt when no one spoke to her at all.